This is another Ask Brendan session. I've got a load of questions in front of me, some different questions today, and I'm going to start with one from Jiggy. What's your thoughts on sumo deadlifting compared with conventional deadlifting? That's a good question. I'm a big fan of sumo deadlifting. You do need to have a little bit more posture and flexibility, I believe, to do traditional deadlifting, because you've got to get right over the bar, whereas sumo deadlifting you can drop into that squat position a little bit more. Sumo trains your inner thighs, your adductors a bit more, whereas the traditional deadlift trains your probably lower back and hips a little bit more. The sumo has a greater similarity to the squat movement. So if you're doing a lot of squats in your program, it's sometimes a good idea to switch back to doing traditional deadlifts. But be careful with traditional deadlifts from a volume perspective, because they do train your lower back pretty damn hard. And if you're doing a lot of other exercises for the posterior chain in there, it can overload your back seriously. So we tend to vary them. We'll do kind of 3-week cycles, sumo, 3-week conventional, 3-week trap bar, 3-week from a deficit, for example. But look at your athletes. Remember, you're training athletes and not exercises and not sports. We're training to get athletes better. Yeah. So you can't just think about sport. You've got to think of the bodies that are in front of you and make sure that they are performing well with good technique and they are developing. Okay. Second question, can you outline a basic interval training session and how do I monitor progress with and without a heart rate monitor? And that's from David S. Alright, so that's a good question. Firstly, intervals for me are way better than doing steady state or continuous work. So interval training is the one if you want to get, certainly if you want to drop fat, because it's got that excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, so EPOC, so that means that you're burning calories for longer after the sessions, so you're going to get better results when it comes to fat loss. But in terms of sport specifics, it's much more specific. So interval training, great way to go. In terms of monitoring progress in a basic session, you can do a couple of ways here, but I'm going to give you a really simple one, and it's just extensive to intensive. You could do it the other way, you could flip it on his head and do like a reverse periodized version, but extensive intervals are basically longer intervals with a bit of rest, a fair bit of rest, and then you're working into more intensive intervals. So you're going something like 90 seconds on, 90 seconds off, or 90 seconds on, 2 minutes off. You're working hard for 90 seconds, having a good rest and recovery, and then you're doing kind of 6 to 10 reps of that intensively. You can use bike, treadmill, rower, or whatever you want to do. You could use specific means as well. And then you'll taper that in and you'll go from 90 to a minute, and then your work to rest ratios will go from being kind of working for 90 seconds, resting for 2 to 3 minutes, down to kind of 60 seconds for a minute, down to more like 40 seconds and 40 on, and you've got equal-ish work to rests. Then you're going to start getting more intensive, and you might even go to negative work to rest. So you'll work for say 40 seconds, rest for 30, and that's a really taxing interval session on the aerobic system. But very specific, and a lot of research shows that it's one of the best ways to develop all-round fitness and work capacity. In terms of monitoring progress, heart rate monitor, again, I'm not convinced you really need that. If you're looking to work harder for a specific amount of time, you really need to be thinking about monitoring it through repetitions or distance or time. So for example, if you're doing 1 minute on, 1 minute off on a treadmill, you monitor the distance that you run. Okay? If you run 400 meters in 1 minute, and then the next minute you run an average of 410 meters, you've done more work, you've improved. The same with specific stuff. So I like to use burpees. One of the tests I use for my MMA fighters is a 20 seconds on, 10 second off burpee test for 10 reps. And with that you've got 10 efforts of 20 seconds of burpees, and it's 5 minutes in duration, so it's like one round of a fight, an MMA fight. And what we do is we look for a minimum of 12 burpees per 20 seconds for that 10 reps, so you've got 120 at the end. Okay. The maximum we've seen is about 14 average, so 140. It is possible to do more. Some of the flyweights, you should probably be aiming for more like 150, 155. But believe you me, if you're an MMA fighter or a combat athlete, try that 10 sets of burpees. And if you get 140, I'll come and train you for free. It's a really tough interval. So think about monitoring your work capacity when you're doing interval training, not your heart rate or that kind of stuff. It doesn't really matter. Ultimately, we're trying to work harder, we're trying to do more work in a set time, and that's pretty much what we're after as athletes. Okay, very last question from CJ. If you could give a total beginner one piece of advice, what would it be? I have to say in this case, I'd have to go with consistency. A beginner likes to do loads of different stuff, soak up loads of different things. They're like a sponge. They can't wait to do more. And that's brilliant, and we've got to fuel that and give them some variation. It's great. It's a great place to be when you're first starting out. But it soon wears off and it becomes more of a process, and we've got to keep it challenging, we've got to keep it varied as well. That's our jobs as coaches. But one thing I would say to a beginner is stick with the program, turn up, be consistent, and you will see results. And it's very simple. If the program's in front of you, you just got to work the program. It's a pretty common, it's been said many times, but turn up, work the program, be a bit flexible as a coach to adjust things here and there, but as a beginner, make sure you're turning up to sessions on time, working hard, going home and resting, be consistent. That's the piece of advice I'd give you. And that concludes another Ask Brendan section. If you want to have your questions answered, drop me an email or comment after this or below, and yeah, I'll speak to you again soon.